Welcome to Wizard Team, a Black magical podcast for Black magical stories.
Hi everyone, it's Bayana and Porshèa embarking on a journey through the many fantasy stories written by and about Black people. Today we're really excited to be joined by Jordan Ifueko, author of the upcoming YA fantasy, The Maid and the Crocodile. Hi Jordan.
Hi there, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming through. We know there's a couple different community members. One in particular, DJ, was really excited to hear that we're interviewing you. So you have a lot of people in the Black Nerd Create community who are excited to hear all things that's coming forward, and they're happy just to know that you're with us for an interview. So it's so fun. I feel like there's a lot of good energy here today.
Thank you.
And since we're here today, we're going to talk about your latest release, which is The Maid and the Crocodile. Would you mind briefly telling the audience what this story is about?
Yes. Real quick, is it just going to be a podcast or also the video?
Just the podcast.
We take clips from. Yeah.
Mostly. Okay. I just wondered how much I should be like, hey. So thank you. So The Maid and the Crocodile is it's many things in one. It's a adventure that kind of celebrates the dignity of laborers. It's a romance. It's very, very loosely inspired by Howl's Moving Castle. But the basic plot is that a disabled teen domestic worker has the power to change people's fates by cleaning their houses. So when she sings, she's able to see this substance called spirit silt, which is made of the expectations that we put on ourselves and other people. And it covers all of our possessions wherever we hang out the most. So your bed is covered in the ambitions that your mother put on you from the time you were a child. Your vanity mirror is covered in all of the insecurities, that you have had. And so her superpower, or magical power rather, is to sing and be able to see all of that so she can clean it. So she's a domestic worker. She's a maid. But because she has this ability, wealthy people get really excited. They're like, this person can, make us feel good about ourselves. So the moment her ability is found out, it's exploited. These wealthy people want her to be what they call a curse eater, a sin eater, where, they can all come and basically have her wash them clean of their guilt for all of the terrible exploitative things they do to people like her, right? So it's a very, very class-conscious fairy tale. And of course, the other element of this is that the day she leaves, she ages out of foster care and has to go find a job, gets a job at this inn. 5 mansions appear from rubble overnight. They're shrines to a god that everyone knows only as the Crocodile, and he's rumored to eat pretty girls. So she gets the attention of this god on accident while she's already trying to find a job, work, not be homeless. And this man, God, he's like a 19-year-old immortal. He's, mysterious and magical and powerful and also somehow useless, which is, I guess, how I like beautiful men in stories like this. That's very entertaining to me, which is why Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite stories. He's also beautiful and powerful and useless. So it's a lot of things. It was very ambitious for the length that I had to write it. I knew it couldn't be like a big fantasy tome. I didn't have that in me. I have a lot of chronic illness and I had deadlines. Obviously, I'd already sold it to the publisher. So I do think I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I just needed to cram it into a manageable amount of words. And I'm really excited for people to read it. I think last point, it is in the world of my existing series, Raybearer. It takes place 10 years after the end of Redemptor, but I purposely wrote it so it could be read by someone who's never been in the Raybearer world at all. Because I wanted to really pivot away from the characters in the Raybearer series who are at the top of the power structure in this world, and I wanted to write about someone at the bottom.
Yeah, I definitely when I got the arc, I was like, oh, this is shorter than I expected. And then reading it, it didn't feel like anything was missing at all. I really do think you did a great job of keeping it all kind of like condensed, but it all still kind of feeling really like full.
That's such a relief to hear. Thank you.
um and then also going off of what you said, you mentioned that the book is set in the world of Ray Bear. Did you always know that you wanted to write more stories with like in that universe, or did the story just kind of come to you and it like felt like, okay, cool, I want to do this?
I mean, I always casually toyed with the idea of more stories in the world. Although I started the world of Raybearer when I was 13. So by the time, it got sold as a duology, I was already a little bit like exhausted with it because I wanted to try new things. However, in Redemptor, I wrote a certain character who I just found so interesting, and he was actually supposed to die at the end of the book. And in a way, he does, but I actually told my editor after like submitting the book to her, and it was in its like almost final printing, or almost final stages of editing rather. um I'm unkilling this character. I'm just unkilling him. And I hadn't sold her another book yet, so she was like, excuse me, why would you? And I'm just like, look, I have plans that I cannot share with you because the haters will sabotage me, and also the publisher hasn't bought it yet. But so I just unkilled him to leave that possibility open, and then after the fact, I sold my publisher The Maid and the Crocodile, which of course, minor spoiler, is it features a character you see in Redemptor. So but you don't have to read Redemptor to understand it.
Yeah. You mentioned a second ago that you decided that you wanted to write the story from a very different perspective than the Ray Bears and Terrasai. So, like, even though you see a character that you know from Redemptor, you're getting a whole new iteration of like what the world of Aristar looks like, and you're able to show new sides of both the place, but also the magic system that was built in the original duology. What did you enjoy most about expanding your world building, and what did you find the most difficult when it came to building that out?
Oh, well, I mean, what was so fascinating and engrossing about writing Small Sade, who is the main character of The Maid and the Crocodile, is that she, like, it would basically take a miracle for her to be able to meet the protagonist of my previous book, Raybearer, right? Because the protagonist of the previous book is working with emperors, right? Is at the up top echelon of society. And I wanted to examine this beautiful world, from the perspective of the people who made it beautiful, right? Because when you write about a Black girl who is an empress or who serves an emperor, and she has beautiful clothes and she's bathing and, she has a crown, all of those things take laborers, right? Beautiful clothes don't exist without someone hunched over with a needle and thread, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neither do clean, beautiful rooms. Those are maids in there making the place where your beautiful princess lives. And there is such an aura around the main character of my first novel, where she's a deeply good person. She cares about people who are smaller than her. She cares about people who don't have what she has. But when there exists a system where there's that much distance between you and the least powerful person in the country where you live, your very existence as a more powerful person is going to impact them, and not necessarily positively. Even if as a person you're a good
Mm-hmm.
person, the very fact that you cast such a large shadow means some people are going to wither in that shadow because they need sunlight and you're too big and you're taking it up, right? And so it was challenging for me in a way to write a protagonist whose existence in some ways was positively influenced by the existence of my, good, powerful empress of the previous book, but also whose life was negatively impacted by her, right? Because you're defensive of all of your main characters. And I love Tarisai, the main character of Raybearer. And so I had to really get to a mature emotional place in myself where I was like, okay, but what are ways Tarisai might have even unintentionally screwed up someone else's life simply because she has that much power? And what is that person's perspective like? Um, so to explore this world that I have previously only described in palace rooms from dirty streets and slums, it was really uh it was a really maturing challenge for me, because I don't know, it's like you want a place that you created and a place that ended in happily ever after in the previous book to be perfect. You want to almost keep that fairy tale haze. But I think that we take away from the dignity of the laborers who make the world run when we try and airbrush their lives like that. And honestly, this book is directly inspired by the essential workers of the pandemic, because that was so
Mm.
eye-opening to me and a lot of people. How it's like, wait, so the people we pay the least are the ones we cannot afford to let stay home when the world is in crisis. Shouldn't that mean they get paid the most? Like, how does that make any sense? Like, these are the people who have to risk their lives so we can eat, so we can survive, and they're paid the least and they're treated the worst. They're literally essential. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so to see my main character grapple with this was really, really important to me, in part because of all of the wonderful labor movements and kind of class consciousness that have arisen out of the pandemic era.
It like I feel like it was captured really well. And I think that like it was also interesting because we obviously like Small Sade is the main character and is like telling the story. It's also interesting like how we see her also unlearn things that she's been taught by society, even though they like even as they're like contradictory to her experience or they're like actively harming her. Um, she also has to kind of like realize, oh no, like I shouldn't be treated this way or like I shouldn't, you know what I mean? So I am curious about like how did you kind of like or yeah, what how did you kind of like figure out what her arc was going to be and yeah, just like what that process was like for you.
You know, the my process of writing a protagonist is always a little bit murky to me. It always feels mystical, because while I'm not one of those authors that are just like, "Oh, these characters just exist and tell me what to say." I'm like, "No, writing is a job. Like it's
Mm,
something that you consciously do. You are consciously creating." However, where those elements of creation come from can be so unintentional. You know, like I was many chapters into writing Small Sade before I realized that her mannerisms are the mannerisms and expressions of an actress named Medina Nalwanga. I think that's her last name. If you saw The Queen of Katwe, she was a wonderful child and teen actress who was in that movie with Lupita Nyong'o. Um, and so, you know, there'll be elements like that, like, oh my goodness, like that's where that comes from. But then you'll see little pieces of her that reflect people you know. You'll see pieces that reflect myself. I feel like all of my characters are just a Frankenstein of people who have made an impact on me and have like captured my curiosity. I think maybe I draw a little bit from my background in studying theater. In college, I was a theater minor, where you know there are many schools of thought to acting and directing, but one method you can use is, instead of trying to become a character, try and find what that character looks like in yourself. So if they're a really insecure character,
mm,
you are going to like basically focus on your own insecurity and blow it up, right, so that it becomes everything that person is. But what insecurity looks like when Jordan is playing insecurity looks different when someone else is playing on their own insecurity, right? So then you can get the same character played all of these fabulous different ways that are somehow the same. And that's how I feel sometimes when I write these characters. You know, the villains in my book, people who I find reprehensible, are in a way flashes of things in myself that I find reprehensible. But luckily, you know, I have the morals to like correct. But it's like
mm,
I understand when I write a jealous petty character, it's because I understand what it feels like to be jealous and petty, right? I understand what it feels like to have like a bigoted impulse, and luckily I was raised in a way that lets me like tamper that down. But when you write a new character, it's like, oh well, what if that wasn't tampered down? What if that was what my whole worldview was made on, and that's what this
mhm.
character is. um So that's a little bit of the background on how I'm pretty sure my character building works. But I don't know, when people ask me that question, it's a little bit like trying to ask an old Nigerian auntie how she makes stew. It's like maddening, right? Because I'm like, auntie, how much cayenne pepper goes into the stew? And she's just like,
They never have
just put
exact.
some, just put some. You add the spices until the ancestors tell you to stop. That's the measurement. Like, and so that is, if I'm honest, that's how it really feels to write. And yet I know that there's like all sorts of things that go into it that are like specific, but it doesn't feel that way. And so sometimes when I'm asked to like say teach a creative writing workshop, I have to like deconstruct my own writing process because I never do it that like clinically or intentionally. I'm just like, I wrote a book. I don't know. Like, I don't. So
yeah, it's like my mom says, it's a vibe. Like,
exactly. But you can't tell like a room full of 12-year-olds it's a vibe. You'd be like, okay,
right.
here is a plot. So
yeah, I think like speaking about what makes characters like special and specific, like when I return back to the thought about like the crocodile, he was special enough for you to want to not kill him off all the way and like actually want to return and revisit him here. What about him like kind of like gave you that impulse to revisit him? And what are some of the themes that you wanted to make sure that you explored through him as a character in this new story that you weren't able to do maybe originally?
well, as a very minor spoiler to Redemptor, the crocodile is kind of a foil to Tarisai. So they are both these revolutionary minded people who want to change things structurally, who see structural problems. But Tarisai has more in her life than the crocodile does. Tarisai has a family that she made herself. She has a found family. She has she wants to live for a world that has been changed by revolution. She doesn't just want to lead the revolution and burn the previous regime down, even though I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just, you know, better worlds aren't just made by, swords and spears. They're made by people who grow the gardens afterwards in the new world, right? And so the crocodile, because of his past trauma, his family was murdered over time and he had to watch it as a child and a teenager. And he decides to do this amazing thing because he, oh gosh, I can't say things because that's a spoiler for Maid of the Crocodile. But due to a certain sequence of events, his entire dream was to die in a revolution. Like, oh my gosh, I got to be part of the people who defeated the bad guys, and then his future after that to himself is a blank. And it's this big tragedy when Tarisai in Redemptor figures out that this man has no plan post-revolution, that he is basically suicidal. And he's disguising it as being a champion of the revolution, which is true, he is, but he's also a suicidal teenager who is not dealing with that at all. And so I didn't want that to be the end of his story. I wanted to see, like, okay, what happens when you finally take that away from him? Because I guess this is a minor spoiler for The Maid and the Crocodile. He is not able to die. He does something to himself that makes him immortal. He basically becomes a god. And so, but he's like a washed up god with no purpose in this new world because his revolution was successful and it ended 10 years ago. And basically he blipped out of existence, came back. He's like, oh my gosh, what happened? And he's still a teenager. He is the same age he was in consciousness and in body that he was 10 years ago, and everyone else has moved on. And they're like, oh yeah, thanks for the revolution. Cool, yeah, the working class is in power in that country now. It's great. Everyone's, and he's just like, but what am I supposed to do with my life? So I found that story so compelling because a lot of YA, it deals with the taking down the bad guy part. And it doesn't deal with the messiness of a world after revolution at all. And I was far more interested in that world at this point. What is a world where a lot of the damaging structures have been successfully brought to heel, but a lot of them remain, first of all, because the process of rehabilitating a world takes a long time.
Yeah.
You know, and what do you do with people who don't know how to grow a new world? They only knew how to rip the last one down. Because that's historically where a lot of revolutions have messed up. It's like you took
Mm-hmm.
down a regime, and then all of a sudden, these people who just wanted to, like, fight for what is right now have to be like accountants and gardeners and raise children, and they're not necessarily good at it, right? So that kind of story just fascinated me. But also, I'm a big old softy romantic. I almost said a spoiler name. The Crocodile is a handsome, charismatic, useless man, and I needed to write a love story between him and a practical woman who, like, can't stand him and also, wants to, like, kiss him in the rain. And that's what I wanted to write. And that's what The Maid and the Crocodile is.
Speaking of the crocodile, there are a few other like notable creatures that show up in the story, from Clement the gecko to different like frogs, beetles, dragonflies, as well as lesser and great gods. How early did you know you wanted to incorporate smaller, often exterminated creatures into the story with that already has like an extremely vulnerable young maid as the main character? Um,
Thank you for that question. So, one concept I really, really love that I haven't seen explored a lot is the idea that working class people, so people who are going to have to be more in contact with everyday things and with the land itself, are going to actually encounter magic more often than privileged people. Because
mm,
usually in fairy tales, it's the opposite, right? It's like, if you're the most beautiful princess, then you attract the attention of a good fairy. And I'm just like, you know what? Actually, a princess who is in a tower, who, like, has her clothing brought to her, her meals made, she has never met any of the animals who will then be in her stew, right? Like, I actually feel like she'd be in somewhat of a sanitary environment where she wouldn't encounter forces of magic very often. Whereas, a maid scrubbing sheets in a nearby stream, like, any spirit in that stream or in the forest is going to be like, hello, who are
mhm.
you? Right? And so I loved the idea when I was, the texture of The Maid and the Crocodile was still forming in my mind. I loved the idea of a main character who encountered gods and spirits all the time and was very unimpressed. Just like, like this gecko, his name you later find out is Clement. He's just outside of her orphanage. She's saying goodbye to all of her former foster siblings because she's aged out of the foster system, and it starts talking to her. And her reaction is not, oh my gosh, a talking gecko. It's, oh no. Oh my god, it talks. Okay. Well, what god sent you? What does it want? Like, I'm so busy right now. Can, like, the gods, like, just
Mhm.
leave me alone for like 2 seconds? Like, 2 seconds, please. You know? Um, and that is loosely inspired by the way West Africans have traditionally dealt with spirits and things like that, especially before colonialism. A lot of those indigenous West African religions, um, a lot of people bring a kind of Western mindset to those religions and think that, oh, West Africans revered this thing, like they revered the nature spirit, they revered this. And there's some truth to that, but really what it was, it's like dealing with a very needy neighbor. It's like, okay, look, you gotta leave some offerings under that tree. If you don't, the spirit in that tree is gonna get offended. You don't want it to be offended. You're gonna have a bad crop season. Like, you gotta. He's whiny. He's whiny. You leave him some rice wine, some plantain, some cola nuts. He'll be okay. Like, that's how these people deal with spirits, right? It's not
Mhm.
this, like, you know it's not a big deal. It is, but only in the way that, like, keeping down the weeds in your backyard is a big deal, right? Like,
Right.
you gotta do it. But
Yeah.
it's so practical, and I find that practicality just charming. you know um So yeah, I kind of forget what the question was, but I like yapping, so that's fine.
No, I feel like that answered the question. I think also this is like slightly related, but not as big, you know.
Mhm.
Why did you make Clement the cutest reptile like in all the lands?
Oh my goodness,
And
yes,
then like
okay.
do like how
Oh,
do your feelings about these creatures like do you actually like love geckos like this? Like is it because he's adorable?
okay, so I do love geckos. I do love geckos. I was looking around because I got a 3D printed Clement, and I'm realizing he's not here because I was doing a photo shoot yesterday. Um, but I think geckos are adorable. I don't know, their little faces. Even when they're doing like creepy things, like kind of like pulling their skin off with like their mouth. It's gross, but at the same time I'm like, you know what, buddy, you look like that's so satisfying. That looks so fun for you, right? I don't have a gecko, unfortunately. I have a dog that I love very much, and every time that I write, and he's such a sweetie, he only has 3 feet, and every time I write an animal, Reggie, his full name is Reginald Ovakama Herman Ifueko, because I am Nigerian and my husband is Jamaican, so you know he had to have like a very Jamaican Nigerian sounding name. Um, and yeah, he makes it a little bit into every animal that I write. Um, so there's a little bit of my schnauzer in Clement and his like kind of long suffering loyalty to people, where it's just
Mhm.
like like I'm these humans, man, this whiny god, but I'm gonna stick by him. It's like that's your man. I'm gonna stick by him, I guess. Yep. um, there's actually aspects to the magic of Clement that I didn't get to go into in the book just because there wasn't room for it. And anytime there's a space that would just be me explaining magic and it's not propelling the plot forward, I challenge myself to cut it because it's interesting to
Mm.
me and it's going to be interesting to like a certain percentage of my fans who just love the world. But in terms of the book and what makes a good book, um, I had to cut some things. But the very fact that Clement gets a name that Small Sade helps him come up with gives him power. He was created to be something very simple, a messenger, and kind of almost a slave. And for another servant, you know, a serving girl, to give him the agency of a name actually imbues him with more power and consciousness.
Mm.
Um, and so it's something that I kind of hoped to explore in like maybe a short story that I put out with the paperback. I don't know if I'll have time to do that. I can't make any promises, but anyway, we'll see.
If you're able to do it, I know we'll all love it because it was so fun. It like even just the way he woke up the
Oh
crocodile
yeah,
when at one point was hilarious.
relentlessly.
Um,
Yeah.
it was just so fun. So I would, if you had the chance, I'm not putting no extra pressure, but I know that I for one would really enjoy seeing like a short story from that perspective. Here on Wizard Team, it's no surprise that we love books. We also love supporting the independent bookstores.
With our bookshop affiliate link, you can not only get all the books on your TBR, but you can support indie bookstores and B&C at the same time.
And if you're not sure what you want, that ain't no problem. Check out our The Plot Thickens list full of recommendations from none other than Porshèa herself.
Head to www.bookshop.org/shop/blacknerdscreate to treat your shelves.
Treat your shelves.
Oh, that's nice. That's clever.
Oh my goodness.
That's clever.
On Wizard Team, not only do we do a close read of Black fantasy books, we also go on many tangents about other topics that are of interest to us. Monthly Magic, the Black Nerds Create newsletter, is another way to find out about the topics that are of interest to not only the host of Wizard Team, but all the members of the Black Nerds Create collective. Subscribe to Monthly Magic at blacknerdscreate.com to get a free dose of magic in your inbox each month.
And while we're still on this like thought of like vulnerable and notable characters, Small Sade makes friends with a staff at her first job ever, the Balogun Inn. in the most endearing of ways. And as they listen to each other's stories, you can feel these characters who have coined themselves the amenities. And Small Shade admire the ambitions that different people within the group have. How does this like receptive relationship play into the theme that you kind of incorporated throughout the original duology to like empower people?
Well, I'm a big Found Family fan, as anyone who's read the Ray Bear books will know. Um, but I also find really beautiful the way that we make community um, with people who are in our same circumstance, right? And I think that, for example, I think it's not a coincidence that a lot of workplaces will try and put in rules that are illegal, by the way, to say you can't discuss your salary with coworkers. Like they want to make division among you because they know that actually there's more of you on the working floor than there is in the C-suite executive office. And if you guys like are a little bit too fond of each other and care a little bit too much about each other's rights and working conditions, it's actually really easy for you to band together. Unless, of course, you have been fed a culture that means you're supposed to see each other as competition. You're supposed to, you know, all vie for the approval of the boss, right? And so I really wanted to write about a workplace where it's like all of them understand that they're at the mercy of this powerful boss, but they fight back by being a community. Like the fact that they're friends, that they're a little band that call each other amenities and have like special names for each other, and they have these rituals they do when they all go to sleep together. Even those are like small revolutionary things they are doing because they're not letting their circumstances divide them. Every amenity who works at that inn understands who the real enemy is, if that makes sense. And so when Small Sade comes and she's this new maid, and you know, she might get the attention of the boss, I could have written it so they saw her as a threat, right? Because it's like, oh, if there's another employee here, you know, getting the attention of the boss, that means like less attention, maybe less pay for us. And instead, I wanted it to be immediate, like, nope, we're rooting for you to be one of us. You know, we know who the real, we know the real reason why we're all here in the dirt. And it's not because there are more workers that we have to share resources with. It's because the boss at the top is pretty fond of hoarding them all, you know. And there is one worker who doesn't quite understand that, who's definitely swallowed the whole like hustle culture garbage where it's like, well, you know, like I think my favorite way of describing those people are, it's like a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. So there's like there's a worker who's down there, you know, scrubbing in the dirt like the rest of them, but he affiliates himself with the wealthy. Like, oh, I'm gonna be just like them. Like someday I'm gonna own an inn like this, and I'll be telling my employees what to do, right? And I think that kind of culture, like he's a very minor character, so you know, you don't see a lot of him. But of course, the irony is that he's still there, scrubbing in the dirt. He just hasn't accepted that that's his circumstance, and that it's going to be very hard for him to get to the same level of any of these people who kind of made that circumstance for him, right? Or at least made those working conditions not great. I really enjoyed the Korean film Parasite, if you saw that. You know, because it's such a wonderful classist film where you have this family of scammers who move into a wealthy person's house as their domestic staff. And you find out that the previous domestic staff is literally like living in the walls. And like one of them, like every day he basically prays to the owner of the house and says, oh my gosh, you're a rich man, you're so good, thank you for giving me a place to stay. And he's literally like living in squalor in the walls of this house, and he's still praising this wealthy man, almost like he's God. And it's just that utter lack of dignity that workers in the lower class are expected to have in, you know, being grateful to the wealthy for providing them with jobs and opportunities, that I found so skin crawling. And it's like, and you know, I will say, it's a little disheartening. I moved to Atlanta 2 years ago, and unfortunately, you do still see a lot of that classism. You know, nothing kind of makes my shoulders go up around my ears more than hearing Black people, in particular, deify wealthier people, right? And be like, I'm gonna get like that, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna, just like, any, just give you an opportunity. Like, I really admire like hard work and wanting to be creative and wanting to provide for your family, but just understanding that the wealthy are not going to be our saviors is something that I really, really wish more of us would embrace. What we're going to win when all of that power and that opportunity is distributed, not when some of us get to be billionaires, right? So that's something that I encounter a lot where I currently live. And that's been really interesting.
Yeah, and it's very like clear throughout the story like how you're making those like class consciousness kind of like discussions, and on that, like I think that was very clear in the like protests at the park scenes, and how like especially how the actual distance between these like very personal and like conversations that are happening at the inn, of the like the people who are have nots, and then like the situation that's happening like right down the street at the park, where there's like the small band of like haves and people who are like kind of in that like aspirational deifying kind of like aspect, right? And then also people who are like the have nots, but they're the larger group, and they just haven't like organized like they haven't organized in mind that way, but they've kind of aligned themselves and how they move within the park that way. So what was your thought process as you were like making these contrasts between like these intimate space like of the inn, but then the kind of like public displays at the park, and then what's happening in the main story at the same time?
Well, I mean, I really wanted a story that was limited to a few really compelling settings, because the Ray Bear books are like, they're literally an adventure that span not only like a landmass the size of several continents, it literally like goes to hell and back. Like, it goes to the underworld, like it goes everywhere. And so for the Maid and the Crocodile, I was like, no, I want to get to know a single place so intimately that it's like that setting is a character in and of itself. And so I do that with a few places. There's the inn where Sade works. There's Bikina House, which is the mystical manor where the god lives. And then there's these neighborhoods, right? And one of which is Ileoba, which is the luxury district. Ileoba is it's loosely based on Yoruba words that mean like the king's house. And so this square is one that used to be reserved for the nobility. But thanks to the new policies under this, new benevolent regime that was kind of established in the Ray Bear books, they're slowly trying to convert these spaces to public land. And where everyone, like a third space where people can exist and, have communities and, watch their children play and have picnics and like listen to lectures. Basically this utopia that I would love to exist in my world. I moved here from Los Angeles, and all of the green space, with very, very few exceptions, is either a cemetery or a golf course. Trying to find a park just to walk in that was not a cemetery or a golf course in Los Angeles was like an actual challenge. And I just thought, that is so tragic. Like, most of the people here have no use for a golf course, and it's taking up these huge swaths of land. That doesn't make any sense at all. Land is for the people who live there, not for, a tiny minority who are going to drop in and play a game every now and then, right? So that's one of the conflicts that you see explored in The Maid and the Crocodile. Who is a city for? And the answer that The Maid and the Crocodile gives is the people who built it. That's who the city is for. The people who laid down the bricks, the people who labored and gave birth to the children who are now, working in the buildings and sweeping the streets. That's who a city belongs to. It doesn't belong to a minority of people who inherited wealth that let them slap their names on a building. And so it's a pretty controversial thing to say. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I kind of wonder how long I can get away with saying things like this, especially in books that are technically targeted to children. um, because, you know, if I explain these concepts the way I'm explaining them, without giving them labels, a lot of people are really open to these ideas. But historically, the labels these philosophies have had in history are not popular in the United States. So, but, you know, I think that's what stories are for. I think stories are made to make us imagine our current situations from a different perspective and with certain elements changed and rearranged. And if we don't do that, I think it's a shame. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it's the fact that it's YA, I feel like is really important. Like, those are the people who should be hearing these things and like taking in these like ideas to then hopefully like bring with them into the future. So I feel like it, yeah, I hope they keep letting you do, or like letting in quotes, like, you do this, because yeah, it's just like,
well,
it's very important.
my next novel is for even younger kids. It's coming out in 2026, and it's literally set in the United States, like a alternate version of it where like corporations, like 3 corporations own all the towns, to the point where like we've renamed like Los Angeles Gloss Angeles because it's owned by Gloss and Gleam Incorporated. Like, and so I'm not exactly letting up on
Good.
these concepts. Um, but we'll see. We'll see how long I can get away with it. They'll never catch me alive, coppers. So we'll see.
So a key theme that this novel dedicates itself to is like service and what that means. And Small Sade has a very poignant moment where she questions why being in service to others is looked down upon, and kind of realizes that that entire arrangement is built to benefit the rich. So we've touched on it a little bit, but like, why was it important that this particular story end with many characters deciding who they want to work in service to and how they want to do that?
Um, I mean, it would have been so easy to write a fairy tale where where the main character's happy ending was escaping her class, right? Because when we
Mhm.
see stories about girls who are servants, or even girls who are just like the maligned stepchild, their happy ending is usually escaping their class. They get to be a princess. They get to be with the wealthy man. They get to be, you know, or even in a sort of like feminist updated one, it's like, well, then they get to be the empress and the queen, right?
Mhm.
And there's a place for those stories. I definitely think, I mean, hey, like in the Ray Bear book, she gets to become an empress, although that is something that she challenges by the end of the series and the beginning of this book. um but I think a far more meaningful happy ending is to give that class agency to decide what their lives are like, you know. I think a happy ending for a lot of us workers wouldn't necessarily be us getting plucked out of the situation that our friends and family are in and put on our own pedestal. It would be the situation all of us are in, us, our loved ones, our friends, our families, all improving for the long term.
Mhm.
And what that means is not liberation from working. It means a healthier workplace. It means a workplace that you have agency over, a workplace that respects your time and your disabilities and, you know, what your future is. The happy ending of The Maid and the Crocodile involves an employee-owned establishment rather than being swept off into a castle. Although there is a little bit of sweeping off into castles, but I won't go into that in great detail. So yeah, it was important to me to write a new kind of happy ending.
Love that. I love the energy of the book and overall, and like how much like thought really goes into it. But I really cannot end this interview without touching on 2 romances that have will they or won't they energy, but in very different ways. First, there's Yeun and Dele, who whose will they or won't they really revolves around Delia showing true investment within the relationship. Like, will she do it or will she not? And then, of course, there's a literal shared feeling between the Crocodile and Sade, who have the more classic will they or won't they kind of relationship. And since both relationships include like one affluent partner matched with a working class partner, which themes did you want to explore through those relationships and these like specific romances, and why?
Well, I think I see so many romances where there's a power dynamic, right? Whether that's a more problematic power dynamic like age or like, boss and employee, like that kind of thing. Or if it's just like an unfortunate power dynamic that isn't really anyone's fault. Like, oh, hey, I'm an immortal 19-year-old with unspeakable power. And you're a maid. Oh, oops. And you're not even my maid. It's not like, she works for him. She's just, on a different rung in, this society. And I wanted to explore what that would really look like, because love doesn't actually conquer all. It doesn't. Love is beautiful, and it's special and it's magical, but it doesn't. Like, the love between two people is not actually strong enough to change a structural problem with your society, right? And so I wanted to have a romance that does have a happy ending, but what would that actually require? Like, what are you actually willing to sacrifice for someone you love? And what are you willing to do to make the world better for them if it is privileged towards you in a way that it is not to them? And so with these two romances, it's funny because in a way they're the same romance in different fonts, with different characters. And I liked that about it because it shows like when there is a class difference, in a lot of the ways it is the same story, even with two radically different couples. That one nugget of it remains the same, remains a problem. Of course, with Yeon, who is the lower working class person in that relationship, it's more complicated because she actually has access to a privilege that she is rejecting for a swath of complicated reasons. And so it's with Sade, it's something she didn't get to choose, and with Yeon, it's something that she did choose. And you get to explore the reasons for that a little bit. That's another thing I had to cut out of the book because Yeon is connected to a very important person from the Ray Bear books, and every time that person from the Ray Bear books is on the page, she kind of just sucks up all the air. So I was like, I can't, this isn't her book. I have to like push her off to the sidelines because if she's here, she's gonna get way too much attention. None of that will make any sense until you've read the book, so apologies.
We follow you. We're with it.
Yeah.
I'll the one we can pick up the book though. And then like I think it's also like what you were saying, like romance not solving everything, and then like having the thought about like what you're willing to do in order to like maintain that relationship. It also became a part of like something I wanted to like gather from you about like what you thought about like romantic emotional ties being a good place to explore like your dreams, like building professional dreams with or without that person, and what that might mean, like without spoiling, of course, for those characters to have that ability to like explore a professional dream with someone romantically, like kind of like challenging them and influencing them a little bit.
Well, the happy ending of The Maid and the Crocodile does involve people working together, people who are in love working together at a job. I think that has the potential to raise so many other conflicts, but also so many other really, really lovely opportunities for them to fall more deeply in love. I think whenever you have a situation where each person in a relationship is able to find meaning in their lives independent of the other person, you have a much stronger relationship, right? I think within romance, we tend to fetishize the idea of someone else being the reason why someone goes on and keeps living, right? And as a teenager, I loved that. Like, I just thought that was like the most romantic thing in the world. And, you know, there's a place for fantasy in these, in, you know, like, I'm not going to knock anybody who likes romances like that. I see the appeal, especially if you just understand they're fictional. But in real life, that's really unhealthy and exhausting, right? Nobody can be your center of you know, reality. Like, you have to find your own center of reality and values for yourself. And honestly, that's quite an unfair position to put someone else in. That's a lot of pressure. And that person is going to fall from the pedestal you put them on. So I really loved the idea of their romance being more beautiful because they found meaning outside of each other. They had to learn skills to build a life for themselves before they were ready to be together. And it's just a happily ever after that I find much more easy to imagine. I think as an adult, when I think of some of my former favorite love stories and fairy tales, it's really hard to have the same warm fuzzies that I did about them, just because, as you know, a married adult, I'm like, you know, if that couple didn't find like some meaning of life besides each other, that's gonna get old pretty fast, actually.
Yeah.
Like, that fictional couple that doesn't exist, I'm worried about them. I wonder how they're doing.
Right. Like, is there 10 years later that we can check on them? With a little concern.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, just the I wonder how that's going. Anyway, I can't name any of some of those books because some of those authors are still alive and they're lovely people. So I just, yeah.
It's just
I
in the
mean,
back of
a
your
lot
mind.
of authors
Like,
are pretty self-aware. A lot of authors are really self-aware about their problematic characters anyway. So, you know, they're just like, it's a fantasy. It's love stories for fun.
mhm. Yeah. Cool. So The Maid and the Crocodile comes out soon. I think when this comes out, it'll be
August 13th.
yes,
I think.
August. Yeah.
Yes.
So we know that that's coming, but and you like hinted at like a book already for younger readers, but just in general, like what you can say, what can we expect from you next? And then like small hint
Yeah.
or question: are there any other like? Do you have any plans, or are you just kind of like planning to kind of leave this particular world for a bit?
The Raybar world is so vast. I could always return to it. There's so many stories I could write in this world. There's Ayatoro's story. Ayatoro is a character who, by the beginning of Raybear, has been dead for like a couple hundred years, but her story is fascinating. There's I don't know. There's so much I could do in that world, but I do tend to realize that I need a little break from it in order to
Mhm.
come back and like see it clearly. Um, and so the answer for the Raybear books is I'm not sure. I'm really happy with the conclusion for all of the characters that I've introduced people to so far. Um, and I have so many ideas for other stories and other worlds that I hope I get to explore.
Mhm.
But what's next is sort of a transition to middle grade. Perhaps not permanently, or perhaps for some time. I'm really enjoying that space. A lot of the books that made me a lifelong reader were middle grade books when I was middle grade age. So it's a really
Mhm.
sacred space for me in trying to write books and stories that are meaningful.
Love that.
Cool. Can't wait to see what's coming from that angle. And I know that everyone is gonna I feel like The Maid and the Crocodile is a book that I'm going to like sit on for a while, like just like in like the memory of reading it, because it was a first time reading it, because it really just was like a very fun experience. And it's so fun hearing you say like you were trying very hard to like condense it, and you can't tell. Like, I remember I got to like the last chapter, and there were some things that weren't resolved. I was like, I mean, I know she's not going to leave me hanging, but we only got 2 pages left. What's happening? And then those 2 pages were very satisfying, and I was like, okay, I should never doubt it. We're fine. We're great.
I'm so glad that you felt satisfied because it was a risk I was taking. Like, Jane Austen does this thing I find like maddening, which is like she will spend the entire time with this like slow burn, and then it'll be like this perfect, passionate declaration of love. And then she'll basically be like, anyway, and then they got married and it was great. Anyway, bye. She'll go. I'll be like, but I just what? And it drives
Right.
me
Can we
crazy.
live in the happy
And
for a moment, please?
I
Yeah.
know, yeah. It drives me crazy, and yet I kind of get it. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, I want to capture like a sparkling diamond of a moment and not drag it out, not ruin it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So I mean, The Maid and the Crocodile, in my opinion, isn't as bad as when Jane Austen does that. And Jane Austen, I love her work, obviously, but it's a little bit, yeah. I do make people wait. I make people wait quite a while. So
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the wait, and I appreciate you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Jordan. Would you please let people know where they can find you and your work?
sure. So my work is available in print and audio anywhere books are sold, though I really appreciate it when people support indie bookstores. If you want signed copies of my work, they're generally available at Little Shop of Stories in Decatur. You can order from them online. And I've written some Marvel comics, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. You can find those in most comic stores. And if you'd like to find me online, I post silly nonsense on TikTok and Instagram. And yeah, those are where I mainly am.
Awesome. Thanks y'all for listening. You can join us on Wednesday for our next episode of Wizard Team. Where we will be back to reading Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn.
Wizard Team is part of the Black Nerds Create Collective. If you want to keep up with our content, you can check out our website at blacknerdscreate.com and follow us on Instagram and Tumblr at Wizard Team Pod and at Black Nerds Create. Until next time, bye.